What's going on, freaks and friends? Filthy Dan coming at you for the 5th entry of the John Carpenter review series. This time we're going to be staying in the TV movie realm, but we are stepping away from horror, suspense, and thriller. We're going to be instead looking at a music biopic. Not a musical, but a biopic about a musician, and not just any musician. We're going to be taking a look at the king of rock and roll himself. We're going to be taking a look at Elvis. Let's get it. So Elvis premiered on ABC in 1979 and stars Kurt Russell as Elvis Aaron Presley, Shelley Winters as Mama Gladys Presley, Bing Russell as Papa Vernon Presley, Robert Gray as Red West, Susan Hubley as Priscilla Presley, Charles Cyphers as Sam Phillips of Sun Records, Pat Hingle as Colonel Tom Parker, and Joe Mantegna as Joe Esposito. But this film is actually pretty cool in that it follows, for the most part, Elvis's life and career from about the time he's 10 years old. We sort of get him as a kid being sort of ostracized for going around apparently talking to himself when really he's communicating with his twin brother who died at birth. And, you know, that's something that seems quite unnatural to a lot of people. I'm not a twin personally, but I could imagine there is some sort of feeling of disconnection there after something like that happens. So we got him going around like that as a kid, and we see him growing up becoming a talented guitar player and singer. It jumps pretty well from the mid 40s up until about the late 1960s, maybe early 1970. But essentially what the film is really just following Elvis through his rise to stardom and sort of his personal life interweaving and how it's being changed on account of his stardom. That's really the easiest way to sum this film up. There's a lot of great things going on in this film. Of course, you have, again, the cast. Kurt Russell in his first foray with John Carpenter. That, I think, can only be left at that. We know where this goes from there. Only greatness ahead for those two together. Kurt Russell, I think, in this movie plays Elvis better than Elvis himself played Elvis. And if you guys have seen any of Elvis's films, you will know that he wasn't a great actor by any means. It's safe to say that Kurt Russell playing Elvis is better than Elvis was in any of his movies. Like, if you combined all of his acting abilities in those films, Kurt Russell blows him out of the water. I know that seems like I'm bad-mouthing the king, but I do not mean to do that. But Kurt Russell definitely injected a great deal of believability into Elvis Presley here, and I felt throughout that the sort of resemblance was pretty accurate. I mean, he had the lip curl right, made a lot of the facial expressions right, and even the southern drawl that he incorporated was perfectly on point. Of course, the singing was not done by him. The singing voice was done by Ronnie McDowell. And I think, for the most part, Ronnie McDowell was a pretty spot-on Elvis vocal impersonator. And when you combine his vocals with Kurt Russell's sort of interpretation of the king physically, you've got a perfect combination right there. And if I'm not mistaken, I think Ronnie McDowell did go on to do some more Elvis Presley vocal covers later on. So if anybody knows for sure, double check. Let me know in the comments below. But we also have Shelley Winters, though, playing Gladys Presley. This is a pretty tragic character because, I mean, this is Elvis's mom, and we see their relationship is very close throughout the film, and how his fame is sort of affecting her. It's breaking her heart to see the sort of distance that's starting to become apparent between them, where he's just always out on the road, and her health is starting to fail, but, you know, she's not going to tell him about it. She's not going to try to bring him down. She doesn't want to rain on his parade, so she's slowly falling apart, sort of in the background, while he's out there starting to rise. But it is nice to see the way he sort of takes care of her throughout, and honestly, I think Shelley Winters might be the standout performance in this film. It's pretty hard to say because everyone captured their role. Everyone portrayed their roles like perfectly. But it was definitely a heartfelt performance there. Pat Hingle was pretty good as Colonel Tom Parker. Pat Hingle, a lot of you guys will know from being as having been Commissioner Gordon in the Batman movies in the 80s and 90s. And I almost didn't recognize him here. I mean, he was sort of that almost slimy manager type. Like, you kind of like him at first as Colonel Tom Parker, but as the film progresses, you start to remember he's Colonel Tom Parker. So he's pretty unethical in his management style. A lot of that doesn't really seep into the film, though. So I guess there's that. I think that Colonel Tom Parker in this film is probably someone that we could appreciate and respect more than, in a lot of ways, the real Colonel Tom Parker. But we got to thank him at the end of the day for giving us Elvis. So there is that. Robert Gray's portrayal of Red West was also pretty good, and I don't know, he almost looks well enough like Red West, but I'm not sure exactly what Red's relation with Elvis was early on in their life, but I don't know. There's just something about it almost feels a little too perfect. I'm not the greatest Elvis historian, but I feel that he was done dirty, and a lot of that I know was at the hands of Colonel Tom. But I don't know. Robert Gray is one of those actors who I've never really seen anything with him, and he's someone who looks so familiar. I did look at his Letterboxd profile. A lot of the stuff he did is stuff that I do not recognize, and he only acted until about the mid-'80s. And I think there's a few TV credits in there, but he did a pretty serviceable job, and you sort of feel his heartbreak when he starts to have his falling out with Elvis later on in the film. Susan Hubley, I think she captures the beauty of Priscilla Presley to a T. That's really all I have to say as far as that goes. Also, the song selection, as far as the songs that were used in the film, I think they were some pretty great choices there. You have Unchained Melody being used as sort of when Elvis and Priscilla are sort of set apart from each other when they first begin to court one another. It's just playing where you're kind of seeing how they're not together, but they would like to be together. It fits so well there. And then Suspicious Minds later, when their relationship is starting to crumble, that was whoo, man. Yeah, that's Suspicious Minds is a song that you don't want to feel that your lover, partner, spouse, or anyone is really trying to direct at you, because that's an owie kind of feeling there. But I don't know, one thing I really do like though in this film throughout is sort of the bond that we see in a way between Elvis and his deceased twin, Jesse Garon. It's touching in a lot of ways because, you know, Elvis never knew his brother, but he's a part of him. So he's going around talking to Jesse, and Jesse's responding to him. And we don't see or hear Jesse responding, which would have definitely ventured into more of the standard Carpenter that we're used to there. But I find it pretty touching because it shows that Elvis wasn't just this perfect normal guy. He was sort of a flawed person who, I don't know if he really did this or not, but it's really interesting to know for sure. But it definitely just adds some depth to the character of Elvis, at least in the film. Like, you get him talking to his shadows as he's older, and he's talking to Jesse when he's looking at his shadow. And I don't know, there's just something about that that's kind of heartbreaking in a lot of ways. But the Red West fallout and the entrance of Joe Esposito for the Memphis Mafia, that was some pretty fucked up shit right there, but I think it was pretty well handled. Just that, I don't know if you've ever been in that situation where you're like the first friend, and then another friend comes in and just kind of slowly scoots you out of the picture there. That's kind of what was going on with the Joe Esposito bit, which it wasn't touched on a whole lot, and I'm kind of glad that the movie didn't take too much attention to focus on that. But when it did, it was pretty, it was kind of a bummer to see that unfold. I do also like the score by Joe Renzetti in the film. Of course, it's not a Carpenter score, but I think it's serviceable enough for the type of movie that we're getting here. It's pretty wholesome throughout. I mean, it captures the exact mood that it needs to. It's like, hey, we're kind of in a happier mood. Let's play some happier sounds. There's a tense scene. There's a couple of scenes of tension there. Particularly this car chase when a fan, not really a fan, but an angry concert attendee just socks Elvis in the face and drives off, and they're chasing him in a car. The music was pretty tense there, and that whole scene was actually pretty cool, I thought. And I think the biggest praise, though, outside of the acting that I can give this film, is that it was not exploitative. Despite having only been 2 years after Elvis had died, this film, I think, was pretty respectful to his legacy. And it was respecting, in a lot of ways, sort of the grieving that was going on around his family and fan base. And it really is a proper tribute more than it is a cashing in on his popularity. So I really do love and respect the film for that reason. And I also admire that this one does not end with one of those "where are they now" cards that we tend to get in biopics. Like, the movie just ends, and I admire that it does that, because we get him doing his reunion after his career has sort of teetered throughout the 60s, when he starts focusing on filmmaking, or being an actor rather, and making not very good films. They're fun, campy, but they're not very good at all. You know, he spent a good portion of the 60s doing that, and his music career kind of waned for the most part. And he makes a comeback, and it just sort of ends with him coming back on top with the Vegas residency that I think a lot of people know him more for that than anything else. Not 100% sure how true that is, but you know, that's kind of what I think, is that most people probably, they sort of picture Elvis as a Vegas act, and this movie kind of ends with him going into that phase, and it just cuts off right there, and I think that's a great spot to end the film. But with all of that said, this movie is not all sunshine and rainbows throughout. There are, of course, some mixed elements here. One particular is that I felt that the story was a little scattered throughout. And again, I do understand that this is a biopic, so that's kind of something that is sort of a given, so I can forgive that. But the TV editing with the fades to black, you know, it kind of makes time jumps a little clearer. But that's another thing too, is that the time jumps in this film, they don't feel like they're properly cemented until we get to the next time jump, and we realize that we had a time jump already. So it feels like, in a way, that we're trying to play catch up with the film, but it's not a complete detriment to the film, I don't think. And another mixed element, like where I sort of praise the aspects of the fallout with Elvis and Red West, I cannot completely praise the falling out that we get with Elvis and Cilla. That one, I think, was a little more important to the story, and in a lot of ways the lives of Elvis and, well, Priscilla Presley, you know. It just felt rushed, but I think at the end of the day it was effective enough at conveying its point. But, you know, it's something that I think it wouldn't have hurt to get a couple more minutes of focus put into. Well, with all the good and mixed stuff out of the way, there is one single legitimate negative I have for this film. And it's regarding the comeback of Elvis Presley. Now, in the film, I'm like 900% sure that his comeback is taking place in 1969 in the film. That's preposterous. That is Elvis imposterous. I mean, Elvis's comeback was 1968. Not 69, 68. That's really the only real what the fuck movie that I have going on with this. And with Kurt Russell and John Carpenter having been Elvis fans, I would like to imagine that would have been something that was not so overlooked. I know for a fact I certainly would not have overlooked that one there. But what can you do? You can't have a perfect biopic ever. It's just never going to happen. Also, little side note, and this doesn't really fall in any of the pros, cons, or sort of in-between aspects. It's just, as far as Carpenter's ability to participate in the general filmmaking aspect, it's clear that he was directing, and you don't really feel like you're gonna forget that at some points, because you kind of feel you feel his presence, although you do notice the absence of a lot of his regulars. He has a different crew going on here, and it really shows. The cinematography's a little different. It's not bad, it's just different. And the scoring, I enjoyed the score for this film, but it doesn't feel like a John Carpenter film with the score, but I think that's a good thing for what this movie is supposed to be, so I can kind of understand and admire that. But the editing, I think having John Carpenter edit would have been pretty helpful, but I don't know, something about the TV editing, I don't know, the TV editing kind of did feel a little weird, especially with, again, the fades to black for the commercial breaks. Those were a little weird in some places, and I don't know, I just feel like if Carpenter had the chance to edit this film, it would have felt a little more cohesive, particularly with the time jumps and all that stuff. So that's just something I wanted to point out there. So at the end of the day, guys, Elvis pays proper tribute to the king and sends us home on a high note. This gives us enough emphasis on his rise to stardom and enough of a glimpse into his personal life without feeling like it's being a lopsided story. It also features a nice collection of Elvis tunes that sound like the real thing, and I find this to be a must-see for any Elvis fan, no matter how young or old you are. Although I do think that there will be some scholars of the king out there who might find some holes throughout the film, but it is a solid biopic and one of the better biopics I've seen, at least as far as musical biopics go. And I think also if you are a diehard Carpenter fan or a Carpenter completionist, it's definitely a must-see. I think at the end of the day, Elvis deserves 3.5 pairs of blue suede shoes out of 5. Definitely check it out regardless. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to like and share this video, and if you have not already, go ahead and stab that subscribe button. That's going to help me out a great deal and keep this channel going strong. It'll also allow you to not miss out on the next entry of the John Carpenter review series, where we're going to be taking a look at The Fog, which is going to be a return to the horror and one of the fan favorites of his catalog. You guys aren't going to want to miss that. See you there.